From a man surviving 2 point-blank gunshots at a funeral to a president, finishing a speech with a bullet lodged in his chest to another nearly dying from a stranger's coughing fit gone wrong. These are every US president's near-death experience. And some of these are so crazy they sound completely made up, but every single one actually happened. We're talking gun battles outside the president's own front door, assassination plots uncovered just days before an inauguration, and at least one man who got shot and decided the smartest move was to keep talking. Let's get into it. Let's start with George Washington. Before he was even president, his body had already tried to kill him more than once. In 1790, just a year into his first term, Washington came down with a severe case of pneumonia so brutal that doctors genuinely believed he was about to die. His breathing turned shallow. His pulse barely registered. He developed a high fever that lasted for days. Newspapers across the country were already drafting his obituary. His own doctors reportedly stayed by his bedside through the night, expecting the worst. And then somehow he just didn't die. He pulled through, finished his term, and went on to define the entire office. A few years earlier, he'd also survived a massive tumor on his thigh that required brutal surgery without anesthesia, the kind of procedure that killed plenty of people in that era from infection alone. Imagine American history without him because of a bad cough or an infected leg. Wild. But while Washington was fighting off pneumonia in his own bed, another president-elect would face a deliberate plot before he even reached Washington, D.C. Abraham Lincoln, in February 1861, just weeks before his inauguration, was the target of an assassination plot uncovered in Baltimore. Detective Alan Pinkerton's investigators learned that conspirators planned to kill Lincoln as his train passed through the city, where he was scheduled to switch stations on open platforms with minimal security. Acting on the warning, Lincoln's team secretly rerouted him through Baltimore in the dead of night, disguised in a soft hat and overcoat instead of his usual stovepipe hat, slipping through the city quietly, while the public believed he was still following his publicized schedule. He arrived safely in Washington before anyone outside his inner circle even realized the route had changed. Of course, Lincoln's luck with assassination plots would eventually run out 4 years later. But this first brush with death never even made it past the planning stage. Quiet exit. Loud warning sign. But while Lincoln slipped past his first brush with death in total silence, another president would face something far more deliberate, standing in broad daylight in front of dozens of witnesses. Andrew Jackson survived not one, but 2 assassination attempts in his lifetime, and the first one is almost comedic in how badly it went for the shooter. In January 1835, a man named Richard Lawrence approached Jackson at the US Capitol following a congressman's funeral and fired a pistol directly at him from just a few feet away. The gun misfired. Jackson, who was in his late 60s at the time and recovering from chronic health issues that plagued him his entire life, didn't flinch. He raised his cane and started swinging at the guy. Lawrence pulled out a second pistol. It misfired too. 2 guns, 2 misfires, both in the same minute. Jackson then beat the man with his cane, while members of Congress rushed in to drag the shooter away. It remains the first attempted assassination of a sitting US president in American history. Sir, you survived 2 assassination attempts in the span of 10 seconds using sheer stubbornness and a cane. Respect. But if you thought surviving 2 gunshots was wild, wait until you hear about the president who finished a speech with an actual bullet still in his body. Theodore Roosevelt, while campaigning for a 3rd term in October 1912, was shot in the chest in Milwaukee by a man named John Schrank. The bullet first passed through Roosevelt's folded overcoat and a thick 50-page speech manuscript in his breast pocket, which slowed it down just enough to keep it from going any deeper. Even so, it cracked one of his ribs and lodged just inches from his heart. Most people would go straight to a hospital. Roosevelt looked at the blood on his shirt, realized he wasn't coughing blood, decided that meant the bullet hadn't hit a lung, and proceeded to give his entire scheduled speech anyway. He spoke for roughly 90 minutes with a live bullet in his chest. He opened by telling the crowd, "I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." That bullet stayed in his body for the rest of his life because doctors decided it was too risky to remove. You really can't make this stuff up. But while Roosevelt was shrugging off bullets, one of his successors was about to get caught in a plot meant for someone else entirely. Franklin D. Roosevelt, just weeks before his 1933 inauguration, was riding in an open car in Miami when a man named Giuseppe Zangara opened fire from close range. Zangara fired 5 shots in just a few seconds before bystanders tackled him. None hit Roosevelt directly. But Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak, who was standing near the car shaking Roosevelt's hand at that exact moment, was struck and later died from his wounds. Roosevelt reportedly stayed completely calm through the chaos, helped pull Cermak into the car, and rode with him to the hospital while the crowd panicked around them. He hadn't even taken office yet, and he'd already dodged a bullet meant for him in the most literal way possible. Cold start to a presidency. But while FDR was dodging bullets before he even had the job, another president would face an attack right at the doorstep of his temporary home. Harry Truman, in November 1950, was staying at Blair House while the White House underwent renovations. 2 armed Puerto Rican nationalists attempted to storm the building to assassinate him. A full gun battle broke out right outside, involving Secret Service agents and White House police, with roughly 30 shots fired in under a minute. One of the attackers and 1 officer were killed in the shootout. Truman, who had been upstairs taking a nap, reportedly walked to the window to see what the commotion was about before being quickly pulled back by staff. The President of the United States almost watched his own assassination attempt unfold like a curious neighbor checking out noise on the street. That's Truman. But while Truman calmly napped through chaos, one modern president would face not 1, but 2 separate assassination attempts within a single month. Gerald Ford survived 2 attempts on his life in September 1975, just 17 days apart. First, in Sacramento, Lynette Fromm pointed a loaded pistol at him from feet away, but the gun's chamber was empty. She had failed to load a round into the firing chamber despite filling the magazine with 4 bullets. Then, just over 2 weeks later in San Francisco, Sarah Jane Moore fired a shot at him from across the street that missed because a bystander grabbed her arm at the last second, deflecting the shot just enough that it struck a wall instead. 2 women, 2 guns, 2 near misses, 2 weeks apart. Ford reportedly stayed remarkably composed through both, but you have to wonder what was going through his head walking out of any public building that month. But while Ford was dodging bullets in broad daylight, the most famous near-miss of all happened decades earlier, and it didn't end the same way. Ronald Reagan, just 6.9 days into his presidency in March 1981, was shot outside a Washington hotel by John Hinckley Jr. 6 shots were fired in under 2 seconds. 1 bullet ricocheted off the presidential limousine and struck Reagan under his left arm, collapsing a lung and lodging dangerously close to his heart. He lost nearly half his blood volume in the immediate aftermath and was rushed into emergency surgery within minutes. Despite the severity of his injury, Reagan reportedly joked with his surgeons beforehand, saying, "I hope you're all Republicans." He was 70 years old, the oldest president to have taken office at that point, and he walked out of the hospital less than 2 weeks later, looking remarkably fine for a man who had nearly died on a sidewalk. So that's 8 presidents who came face to face with death and somehow walked away to keep doing the job. From a misfired pistol on the Capitol steps to a bullet ignored mid-speech to 2 assassination attempts 17 days apart, American presidential history is basically a survival story on repeat. Some of them dodged death through pure luck, some through quick thinking, and at least one through sheer stubborn refusal to act like he'd just been shot. Either way, the office of the presidency has quietly been one of the most dangerous jobs in the country for over 2 centuries. And most people never even learn half of these stories in school. Honestly, it makes you wonder what we still don't know about the close calls that never made the headlines, the ones that got smoothed over in official records or simply never reached the public at all. If you want to know which president had the single weirdest medical condition in White House history, that video is coming next, and trust me, it involves a tapeworm diet gone catastrophically wrong. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it.